I'm Erica Galvez, CEO of Manifest Medics. We are California's largest statewide nonprofit health data network. And I am joined today, so pleased really to be joined today by three very esteemed colleagues. I will let them introduce themselves in just a minute. First, I want to run through a handful of housekeeping notes, the stuff that's not so fun, just so that you're aware. First thing, all your lines are muted. That is just so that we can keep some order here in the webinar. Similarly, the chat function has been disabled for everybody, but we welcome questions from you. And if you'd like to submit one, there's a little Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. You can use that as a way to submit questions. If we have time at the end of the conversation, we will take a few of those. I won't promise, but we will do our best. And then last thing to note is that we are recording the webinar today. We will make that available to everybody through a series of avenues. We'll email it, we'll post it on the MX website. I'm sure it will go out over social media. So if you miss any part of it, you'll be able to follow up. Let's do a quick round robin of intros so that everyone knows, probably everyone knows who you all are. But if you'll just give everyone a sense of your role and your organization, I think that'll help us get the conversation started. And if I'm going to play Hollywood Squares on my screen, I think I see Jay, Mark, and Jamie. It'd be great.
All right. Well, hey, thanks for having me, Erica. So my name is Jay Nakashima. I'm the president of eHealth Exchange. We're a national data exchange network that operates in all 50 states. And, you know, we really try to supplement the work of regional and state health data utilities so that they have a way to exchange outside of their service area. And if you've been fortunate enough to hear the word TEFCA, we are one of the qualified health information networks. So in other words, one of the national networks that has the government's Good Housekeeping seal of approval for TEFCA Exchange. And we're really focusing on supplementing that work of health data utilities, furthering public health, and helping 5 federal agencies with their data exchange activities. So thanks for having me.
Hi, everybody. Mark Overhage. I've worked across a lot of segments of the healthcare ecosystem over the last 3 or 4 decades, practicing physician at a large academic medical center, health services researcher in the health IT sector at Siemens Cerner, and most recently at Elevance Health, one of the large payers in the country. And so I've got kind of a nice, a broad perspective. And today I'm really working with health tech startups, public health organizations, not-for-profits like NCQA and HL7, trying to move this whole field forward. And I'm really excited to be part of the conversation today because I think the decisions we make now, are obviously going to shape a lot of what healthcare data looks like and how it comes to serve more people in the country. So thanks very much.
Amy Bland, I'm President and CEO of Sync Health. In Nebraska, we are HIE and PDMP. And in Iowa, we are the HIE. My career in health tech started many, many years ago when I was a young nurse just trying to make it through the day and get information that I needed to take care of patients, and ultimately culminated in being a leader at Health Information Exchange. So happy to be here.
Thanks, Jamie. And thank you again to all of you for joining the conversation today. Let me also just note for everyone who's joined, we have no slides today. So if you were hoping for a lecture, I am terribly sorry to disappoint. This is going to be a kind of a free-flowing conversation. I do want to lay out a little bit of context to get us started and get you in kind of the reactive mode, and then I'll tee up a series of questions that I think will make for insightful and fun discussion. So I thought, as I was thinking about this kind of framework of headwinds and tailwinds and unknowns, it prompted me to reflect on the last couple of decades of interoperability work and health data exchange work across the health IT industry. And it feels like it's been a little bit of a roller coaster. it feels like we make progress and then we run into barriers, and then we collectively have to find a way around the barrier. Sometimes that's new data standards, sometimes it's new technology, sometimes it's new people. But in many cases, it has really struck me that the federal government has played a key role, in addition to motivated local stakeholders, to really push the industry down the data sharing and interoperability path. And sometimes those levers are focused on tech vendors. We've seen tremendous progress through national networks, incredible progress through HIEs, and increasingly health data utilities. And with a new administration and a new set of key players at the federal level and a host of unknowns, at least what feel like unknowns to me, on the policy front, it feels like some of the things that were propelling us historically, things that I would think of as tailwinds, are evolving. And so part of what I want to pick your collective brains about today is, how do you think about that evolution, and where do you think some of those things are going? So I'm going to tee up questions first about tailwinds. Tailwinds I think of as things that propel us faster than we would otherwise go, faster than we would organically go. And then I'm going to ask you to think about some of the headwinds. And then the juicy part is probably, well, I don't know, we'll see how this plays out. I think the juicy part is probably around some of the unknowns. And we'll want to get your perspective on where you think some things may be shifting. Like I said, evolving between tailwind, headwind, unknown. So with that context, I'm going to start us with tailwinds. These are the things that are really propelling and advancing data sharing and interoperability faster than it would otherwise go across the industry. And there were two that really stood out to me that I felt like they were tailwinds last year. It feels like they are still tailwinds to me this year. And one is the federal regulations around information blocking. Those still exist. They still require a broad set of stakeholders to share health data, and remove opportunities to kind of hide behind or create barriers to data sharing. So that still feels to me like a tailwind. The other is generative AI. The advances that I've seen personally on the Gen AI front in the last 12 months are pretty astounding. And that, again, feels to me like a tailwind. It feels like, especially large language models that require large volumes of data to deliver on the benefits that they stand, or the opportunity to deliver, both for healthcare delivery, but even broader, excuse me, beyond the care delivery system, feels like a propellant. So I'm curious, from your perspectives, what are you seeing as tailwinds in your space? Any thoughts on those two tailwinds? Anything that you think has changed as we go into the second quarter of 2025? And I'll leave it open. Whoever wants to start, happy to have you start.
Well, I'll dive in. It really strikes me that information blocking was and continues to be, a big driver for data exchange, at least for treatment-based exchange. So, in the context of a clinician at a chair side, a table side, a bedside, trying to make safe and effective decisions. And it really was instrumental a number of years ago in increasing that exchange. And I think it's going to continue to do that, at least for treatment. TEFCA, Congress gave us in 2016, said, hey, and the president at the time signed the 21st Century Cures Act and said, hey, the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services needs to create TEFCA, a new national government-sponsored data exchange framework. And it has created a tremendous amount of excitement over the past couple of years. And it had to start kind of recreating treatment-based exchange. So it's just now beginning to facilitate exchange for public health purposes, and then starting, or required next February, some limited exchange for healthcare operations-based data exchange. So that's really driving interoperability. Um, and you know, it's really kind of surprised me because yes, there are some CMS incentives for providers to exchange in TEFCA, but they're not super compelling yet. And you know, it's brought payers to the table. So payers are saying, hey, you know, we've been exchanging with providers for decades, you know, swapping Excel CSV files and HL7V2. And so, you know, there's been some movement there, but I'm hopeful that TEFCA really drives that forward. And then, you know, public health. You know, many of us embarrassingly could barely spell public health 5, 6 years ago, and they do have some nice incentives to further exchange over the coming years. So I think those three things have been really helpful.
Thanks for that, Jay. That's great perspective. Mark, Jamie, additional thoughts?
I would agree with what Jay said, having, been in the business for some time. There's definitely been an acceleration towards information sharing that, when I first started, were definitely prevalent. So I think that the info blocking rules have definitely worked. I think there's still a need for organizations like HIEs to do some first mile and last mile interoperability work because of what the current state of these larger initiatives are. Being from a flyover state, like that's really relevant for me in a rural environment to make sure that rural providers don't get left behind in whatever's happening back in DC. And oftentimes that is the case, whether we're looking at behavioral health use cases or other community-based use cases, tend to get diluted in what are the needs of big systems, what are the needs of three-letter agencies. But really, organizations like mine, making sure that we keep communities and people in mind when it comes to data following the person, when you're coming from a highly rural environment into an urban environment, and the various challenges with the great bifurcation of your data, especially if you're a rural citizen.
Super helpful perspective. Mark, I know you have something to add here.
And I might, just to build on those comments a little bit, I think one of the things that both commenters alluded to was, as we see, I would say the continuing evolution of value-based care is kind of a tailwind, I think, for us. It's going way slower than anybody would hope. It's taking a lot longer, but it's steadily growing. And that's true not just in commercial business, but in government-sponsored plans, Medicare and Medicaid as well. And we may see that accelerate. And I think that the importance there is that it really drives that need, for interoperability between the plans, as Jay was talking about, between providers, because not all care happens in a particular health system and so on, but also for some of these other use cases that were talked about. And in particular, I think one of the things that has been driving and will continue to drive is the importance, and I know, Jamie, this is one of your favorite topics, of data quality. It's one thing to have a CDA or a V2 message or a FHIR resource, but does it have the right data in it? Is it in an interpretable form and so on? And that's a lot of the work that Jamie talked about, the last mile. And I know, Erica, for Manifest MedX, for others, it's a lot of the work that we do at an HIE level to organize and improve that data. But I think that's drivers like value-based care are putting even more fire under that, if you will, not to make too big a pun. The other thing that one more thing about that is I think that we are making some headway in quality measurement, which I think is very important, driving the plan's agenda and priority, to begin to understand. And I know we all struggle with primary source verification and DAV and things like that, but to begin to understand what the difference is between like primary source verification and data quality improvement, and what we need to actually work on and where the value gets created in those processes, that then leads to higher quality care and various incentives from value-based care and quality measurement. I do want to come back for a minute, Erica. You mentioned generative AI, and two things there that I think about a lot. Well, one is how does it help us with exchange? So a couple of specific things. Term mapping, something that we all struggle with, and sharing data. I heard a presentation yesterday from a HIE who claimed that their lab data that they get is only 50% of it is mapped to LOINC. So, 50% not. Well, how do you fix that? Well, we've all put a lot of labor, time, and energy into that historically. That's something Gen AI can and will help with. We all got to figure out how to do that. It can and will. Or another area, I think, is that many of us receive large volumes of unstructured data, cardiac cath reports or pulmonary function tests, things like that. And historically, it's been tough. There's natural language processing. They've been tough to leverage that data. But I do think that generative AI techniques are going to help us extensively in abstracting, especially in complicated structures like cath reports, to get that data into a form that's consumable. And that's the kind of stuff that people are crying for, whether it's patient outcomes or it's those detailed outcome measures that are available in these complex diagnostic reports. And then the last thing on that, and this goes back to kind of drivers, is I think the explosion of commercial interest and people who are now beginning to find that sweet spot of how do I create value for the health system with this cool AI? Well, I need the data that goes with it. And not just the data that's available in the local EHR, but I need the data about what drugs they've got. I need the data, so on. And I think that's going to be really helpful in the sense of that, if you will, commercial pressure on health systems. A, they want to do it, but B, there's also the sort of business leadership, economic pressures that I think they're going to face. And it goes back to information blocking in some ways. But I think it's yet another driver for that openness and interoperability that will create real value for the health systems and for our patients.
I love this potpourri of drivers. This actually it lifts my spirits a little bit that we have a good range of drivers still pushing progress on the data sharing and interoperability front. I wanted to circle back before we go to Headwinds and ask a question on the public health front. This is top of mind for us at Manifest Medics, and I know it's top of mind for lots of other folks, given what has been happening recently with federal clawbacks on COVID funding. And so the pandemic, from my perspective, was a huge propellant for data sharing, right? There's just really fueled attention to the need, not only for good infrastructure, but good data that's actually usable in emergency circumstances, and then to understand over time what happened and what can we do better. And I'm curious from your perspectives, to what extent do you think the need to be prepared for that next pandemic with better infrastructure, better data still exists, given what really looks like pretty significantly diminishing federal funding? Is the funding the thing that's propelling? Is it the COVID and pandemic experience? I just love to get your perspective on. I worry that may slow us down, reductions in funding, and I'm curious what your thoughts are.
Yeah, just off the top of my head, we're not ready as a nation. Again, it's been 5+ years or however long. And we've made some good or some adequate or okay progress, I think, as a country.
Progress.
But no, we're not ready. I think that we've made good progress as a nation in improving the notifiable condition notification process, at least with some of the bigger EHR vendors. But we haven't yet rolled that out or gained adoption from from the plethora of smaller EHR vendors out there. And again, it's based on incentives or a lack thereof. And then I'm not well educated on the topic, but I do worry, how standardized are the stilts? The state and local public health agencies, the city, the county, the state. And are they ready once they receive those notifications to manage, to massage the data and make wise decisions? And then I'm confident that they are not yet enabled to follow up. So when they get notification that that a given individual has a notifiable condition, have they been treated? Are they still infectious? We're definitely not able to follow up on that front. And unfortunately, one of the big challenges in that capability is policy related versus tech related.
I got a
Jamie,
lot to
Mark,
say.
thoughts? Do you have, yeah, Jamie, please lay it on us.
So our memories are short, right? I think that, just thinking back 5 years, like this time 5 years ago, what we were doing, we were all on the phone night and day trying to get things done, because we all were called to serve us as Americans, right? To do the right thing for our communities and our country. And
Sorry for interrupting. I was spraying my groceries with bleach.
yeah.
I was
Right,
too.
that too. We were also doing that. However, we had more sharing of information, like people sitting down and talking, signing agreements, getting things done, because we had a common purpose. I would implore that this administration think if you can do one thing for the country is to have a cohesive HHS data strategy that covers CDC to CMS and every 3-letter agency in between, because you're asking providers for the same data over and over and over again. And it's fatiguing. And that is why we are just fed up with the ask. And let's just sit down and figure out what it is to do it right. That's I think if the HHS secretary could do that one thing, it would be the most transformative thing for healthcare cost and quality that the country has ever seen. And we had an opportunity, and because we got fatigued by everything else, we let this thing go. And I think this is just like the revocation of funding is just another way that we get distracted by the prize, right? And that's unfortunate. However, I am hopeful that there is a political will that has never been there before that we can capitalize on to maybe make some transformative change that was very hard to do previously, but this administration may be willing to do it. So that's where I would say tailwind, not headwind.
That's great. That's good. Mark, any additional thoughts on that front?
Nothing really major to add, but I do think that the pandemic nudged us forward in certain ways, and we may lose a little bit of that ground, but we're forward. And as Jay said, we're not prepared. We're not where we want to be, but we're forward. And I do think that what we learned, as Jamie said, from working together in that crisis mode and the relationships that got extended and deepened in that crisis mode will stand us in good stead, because then going forward, you get to leverage those. So I do think that there's some tailwind, if you will, from that pandemic experience that we're still benefiting from. But as Jamie said, it's not going to be long lived. Another year or two, that's going to be long forgotten. And but hopefully we can continue to capitalize on the forward pieces that we got.
Gosh, I sure hope so. I loved JB your request to our federal dear colleagues. I hope someone is listening to that. That would be a huge progress if we could get that done this year. Then maybe not this year, over the next handful of years. Okay, let me pivot us to Headwinds. And this feels like a bucket, to me, it feels like a bucket that's growing a little bit. That could be because we provide services and infrastructure in the state of California. And there's some things around privacy that I find are emerging as, I'm going to call them headwinds. We could debate exactly how to categorize them. And I want to mention a couple of those and one other headwind, and to get your perspective on whether you think these are headwinds and any others. So I see a bucket on the privacy front, and this has to do with a post-Dobbs world. We have states like California implementing regulations that require providers and health data networks and other organizations to withhold certain information. In California, that does include reproductive health information and gender affirming care information. And in some cases, it depends on the state how that's been defined and kind of what the parameters are for out-of-state data sharing versus in-state data sharing. This feels like a headwind to me, in part because it creates complexity on the technical side of the house that I think many organizations don't have. They're not able to meet today. And so that rate really raises the bar. The other one in the privacy bucket that I have started to hear more recently is actually related to Gen AI, which I think I see and others see as a tailwind, and really comes to a concern at the consumer level about what happens with their data. Where does it go? Who uses it? Is there any way to know that in a Gen AI world over time? So I see a privacy bucket of headwinds. And then the other one I want to put out to you to start the conversation on headwinds is cybersecurity. And I know we have seen lots of concern about data sharing, data aggregation, because of the increase in cybersecurity events, both in terms of frequency and in terms of severity. And so that creates some hesitation and some concern around data sharing. So curious from your perspectives, to what extent are you seeing those things as headwinds or not? Happy to hear you say you're not. And are there other headwinds that you see on the horizon for health data sharing and interoperability?
I can jump in and add one to the pile, which I think is that, we've all had the experience of working with health systems and providers is challenging. A lot of times just because they've got 100 other things on their plates. And I think that is going to be incredibly worse going forward. There's sort of like almost the triple whammy of health systems with 340B, the pharmacy program going away, which has been a huge revenue finger in the dike for a lot of health systems. Graduate medical education funding getting cut. Under fire, they're not for profit status. It may say that, not that they shouldn't be necessarily, but it's going to be another factor. And now with the tariffs driving supply costs up 10 to 15%, where in the heck is there going to be bandwidth to talk about interoperability and data sharing? They're fighting for survival, not just for, they don't have time to innovate and grow. So that's one of my big headwinds I see over the next year, is just bandwidth in the health system to pay attention to anything other than having enough dollars to pay their staff and pay their bills for the supplies.
Gosh, yeah, that's a huge one.
Yeah, to my surprise, Erica, immigration comes to mind.
Oh, say more about that, Jay.
Yeah, we all like you mentioned, some healthcare organizations are withholding parts or all of the electronic medical record due to women's health and gender affirming care, as you mentioned. But I wasn't expecting healthcare organizations to say, you know what, we're not going to share any notes, because they might have a note in there about immigration status. And then to my surprise, there's an added concern because supposedly if data makes its way to a federal agency, especially maybe if that federal agency is a healthcare provider, they are required to share it with other federal agencies. So the one concern is that the electronic medical record being exchanged and most frequently being used for treatment decisions is getting skinnier and skinnier. And no, most of the providers receiving this skinnier electronic medical record have no idea that something has been withheld from it.
I mean, that's particularly concerning if it's information that could cause a patient safety issue.
Right.
I don't know that that's necessarily true for immigration status, but I think you're right, Jay, it creates an environment where there's a hesitation, right? It really creates a hesitation to share information that is important to share. Jamie, thoughts on headwinds?
I think there's overarching a headwind around trust, right? We had some eroded trust during COVID, whether that be trust in public health authority, trust in healthcare workforce, trust in what the information my doctor was sharing with me. I think that's actually going to, looking back, in 10 years, 15 years, 20 years, going to impact health outcomes significantly because we had this erosion of trust. And that's deeply concerning for me. I think we're seeing some of that play out in Texas right now. And that not being addressed as one of our, impending public health crises, I think is very troubling. To the point of immigration and sensitive data, like we've dealt with this before, right? We've flirted with, is health information, law enforcement, accessible data in the opioid crisis. And I think we made some mistakes there that eroded trust again. So I think it's really, in a comprehensive data strategy, we have to find our way back to being trusted agents of information and stewards of information, because I think there's a growing sector of the population that don't trust organizations like mine. I am particularly, offended that nurses are no longer the most trusted person, and or occupation, and I think that should be concerning. That should be like our number one thing that we need to solve for in this space. And I'm particularly concerned with AI and AI use cases and the governance complexity with that. And then the cybersecurity, to answer the other portion of your question, is these cybersecurity events continue to happen, and they happen in very weak spots like rural communities and folks that don't have access to robust tech teams and are probably paying the ransomware. It's not just rural, but I mean, big organizations have this problem too. But that just contributes to this erosion of trust, which I think is potentially one thing that really impacts health outcomes, life expectancy, and a number of things, because people don't get access to information and care that they need because of that issue.
Thank you for raising that, Jamie. That is such a meta headwind, isn't it? It's so the distrust situation on multiple fronts feels to me like such a big and complex challenge. I want to ask a selfish question related to that. Your thoughts on this prompted me to wonder, and I say it's selfish because I lead a health data network, and we think of ourselves as an emerging health data utility. And I have started to wonder in this space where there's concerns about how data gets used and where it gets reused and who has access for what purpose. Is there a renewed role for health data utilities, or maybe I should ask, to what extent do you think there might be a renewed role for health data utilities to help mend that erosion of trust in the sense that our organizations, I think even national networks, to a certain extent, you're built on a basis of trust, right? Your stakeholders have to trust that you're going to do what you say you're going to do with the data that they share through your network. Otherwise, they will not participate. And so I think there are a lot of HIEs, health data utilities, that have mastered the ability to bring disparate stakeholders together, build a foundation of trust, and be able to springboard from that to really advance data sharing. And I'm just curious if any of you have thoughts on, is that a new sweet spot for health data utilities? Is that something that health data utilities could help, the trust erosion could help advance? Not advance erosion, help rebuild trust.
I mean, I'm a fan, and I think that a couple of the big reasons are, one is it's the guy down the block, right? It's your local butcher, it's your, and folks from local organizations who knock on their door and who they see at the state hymns meeting or at the grocery store. There's a level of person-to-person trust. I think the other thing is scale. It's a lot harder to sort of this anonymous somebody over there out in the ether, even when there's an agreement, and it's like, how do you know? How do you monitor? How do you see it? So I think that local organizations play a huge role in building and maintaining trust. And then the other is local interests, and I think we see, whether that's maybe there's a local emphasis on a preterm birth, or there's on obesity, or whatever it is that might be of interest at the state or regional levels. It binds people together, and those are the kind of things that build the trust. It's hard to do that at massive scale, and there's just so many disparities and diverse needs and diverse levels of interoperability across the country. I think it's tough to do at a one size fits all model. So I think it's critical, Erica.
Yeah, I love the idea. And, the more I think about it, this purpose of use or secondary of use, why are you requesting my data? How are you going to use it? That's the biggest headwind I've seen over the past X number of years. And, Jamie hit the nail on the head. Trust has been eroded on that front. And yes, it's generally, if a healthcare organization legitimately request data for a legitimate healthcare purpose, they can generally get the data. And what surprises a lot of folks is then they can use that data they've collected for a legitimate purpose for a secondary purpose, as long as it adheres to U.S. law. And that's where I think trust could even further erode. And so, yeah, healthcare is local, and that might be a great role for the health data utilities.
And I think, who's going to do it besides health data utilities? Because there's no money in it.
There's no money in it.
So there's no money in it. So a local nonprofit whose mission is interoperability and having this responsibility certainly seems to be the right fit for organizations like ours, right? And I think that also, if there's a constituent concern, I'm showing up in a state senator or rep's office at 8 o'clock the next morning, and if it's somebody off somewhere far away, that's not the case, right? It's I'm here, I'm present. If there's a concern, I show up to have a face-to-face conversation with you. And I think that's the pathway back to trust, right? Is being present, understanding the big P and little p politics in your communities, and how we start to do that, and to be trustworthy, right? And also have these conversations about organizations that have been seeking data and have been shut out of data requests historically. I think engaging those groups, finding a way around data sharing and providing access to information is a critical piece for us too.
Yeah, agreed. Very well said. Okay, I'm watching the time. We have about 18 minutes left, and I see a couple of good questions in our Q&A. Before we go to that, I do want to move to uncertainties. And I want to ask you a broad question, but before I get to the broad question, I cannot resist asking a question about TEFCA. Jay, you mentioned TEFCA when we were talking about Tailwinds, really is something that's propelling data sharing and interoperability faster than it would otherwise go. And I will tell you, I felt that way about TEFCA last year. For me this year, I think TEFCA has evolved to my uncertainty bucket.
Yeah.
It feels a little bit uncertain to me. I mean, we have, so just for the sake of transparency for everybody who's joined, Manifest Medics does participate in eHealth Exchange. We have for a very long time. We have onboarded to the eHealth Exchange QHIN, that is a service that we offer our participants. And so we are not completely outside the TEFCA universe, and yet it still feels a little bit uncertain to me. I'm curious to get your perspectives on TEFCA. This has been such a big topic in our industry. For you and your organizations, is it an uncertainty? Where does that fit in your constellation of headwind, tailwind, uncertainty?
Yeah, it's definitely not it's in question. I mean, you know, one can't deny that. TEFCA has been attempting to solve some really tough interoperability challenges that the industry hasn't been able to tackle over the past 15 years. And TEFCA has been able to begin that process because of manpower, specifically with HHS, United States Department of Health and Human Services personnel. And because I'm not sure that it's happened yet, but if that personnel is significantly reduced, TEFCA velocity is not going to increase. TEFCA is required by the Cures Act, but how prominent will the government make it? It's not certain. And will the government continue? A lot of folks have suspected that CMS would come out with some more powerful incentives for healthcare organizations to join TEFCA. And if that writing is no longer on the wall, adoption's going to decrease. So I don't know. My crystal ball's extremely foggy right now.
It's cloudy.
Yes.
Jamie, Mark, any thoughts on TEFCA, where it fits in the?
I think uncertain kind of sums it up.
Uncertain.
I
Okay.
think Jay said it best. Yeah.
Excellent. Can I ask, related to you articulated the kind of federal potential influencers on the TEFCA future, how much TEFCA continues to be a tailwind or not. I'm curious, just generally from your, we all have been doing this for a very long time. And I think, I suspect you would agree that there have been really key times when federal government attention or federal government action has moved interoperability and data exchange forward for our industry. I think about, I mean, Jay mentioned, right, like TEFCA. I think back to certified EHR, when certified EHR technology launched, the Meaningful Use program launched. If we don't see that type of investment at the federal level, or that level of attention, if this becomes like a little detail in a footnote of somebody's memo, to what extent do you think that the industry will continue to move forward? Are we at risk of stagnating on progress? I'm curious what your take is on that.
I believe it's going to continue to innovate, but unfortunately, without the federal incentives, including requirements, it's going to be at a much slower pace.
So I think the other, take a little bit of a contrary view to that, as the emphases shift, and as Jamie talked about and things, I think one of the challenges that health systems have faced is like, wait a minute, we're confused, right? There's our EHR vendor networks, there's HIEs, there's multiple HIEs, there's TEFCA, there's the national network. What the heck is going on? It may offer the chance, well, let's be clear where, what's being pushed. So there may be some opportunities to move things forward. And because to me, it's about mobilizing the data, not so much what's the exact vehicle or channel or, so on that it happens through. Because I mean, at the end of the day, what we're trying to achieve with Cures was mobility of the data, APIs with no special effort, blah, blah, blah. All good goals. But when you started sort of blending in the idea of, well, it's going to be this one national thing and we're going to solve the world with it, I think it created both some expectations that are challenging to meet, and may have bypassed. I talked about data quality and confidence in the participants and so on. That's harder to achieve at a national level. So maybe it's a little bit of a, if it's not being quite as prominent, it might create opportunity for us to move people along with a little less confusion and clarity.
I love this optimism, Mark. Yeah, I am not as optimistic as you are, but I love it. Thank you for that. Jamie, any thoughts on this? Will the industry move itself forward in the absence of, I mean, I don't know that there will be an absence of federal attention to this, but I think it's a risk. I think it's a very real risk.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think it's a risk for all of us. I mean, there's definitely a change fatigue, several things that might happen that can definitely impede further progress. So yeah, I think it's a headwind.
And one of the questions in Q&A caught my eye. I'm going to read it to you and would love to get your perspective. This is from Seth. He said, segregation of alcohol and drug use, 42 CFR Part 2 data, and behavioral health from physical health and social determinants of health is a major headwind. QHIOs, those are qualified HIOs in California, don't even want to handle 42 CFR Part 2 information. He is correct about many of them on that. The complicated nature of releases of information and what can go to whom is too difficult for care providers. Is the current Congress one that can adequately address this? I'm curious if you have thoughts on Congress, but also, are there solutions to the complicated nature? I mean, this has been an issue for Part 2 data for a very long time. I think the introduction of additional regulations at the state level for additional types of data compound this challenge. And I'm curious, where do you think solutions might occur? It is really difficult for care providers to manage. And do you know of anyone who's doing this well?
I don't. I don't think we're doing it well at all. But I do think that it is critical for us to figure it out. And these are like this is the hard stuff, right? Like we've done the easy stuff in interoperability. This is the hard stuff now, when it comes to granular governance and behavioral health and 42 CFR Part 2 data, other sensitive information. And again, I think HDUs are particularly positioned to do this because most are nonprofits, most are neutral conveners, most have multi-stakeholder governance in place. But I would also say that the technology also hasn't come to the table on ways to, at least from a software perspective, to manage this in a good workflow or from a good product perspective. I think there's a lot lacking from that perspective. So I think there's a big opportunity to improve that piece of it. But I do think HDUs are particularly well positioned to solve for this problem.
I think Seth had a great question, because it is, I think, one of the key challenges to move forward, make progress, to be able to get to a more holistic view and address it. And a couple of things that it seems to me, there's a lot of progress in how we look at data and think about data, as well as the public's perception of behavioral health and some of the issues around it. Maybe a little less stigma, a little less. But I think it's one of those areas where the variability creates a lot of problems. I certainly saw, within a particular health plan, for example, maybe a very conservative view of, well, anything, is a drug level for a drug that might be an antidepressant an okay bit of data, or is that under, and then you think about the comment about notes and just immigration. But if you're going to take a very conservative view, a third of my patients in a primary care practice are depressed. And if I'm doing halfway my job, I've mentioned it in my notes. So, and how do you find that, filter it out, limit it without destroying the data? So I think it's one of those areas where if we could get to some clearer, common definitions, even, it would help. Because on the other extreme of definitions, I've heard privacy experts assert, well, it's the psychotherapy notes. That's the only thing that's really protected. The fact that there's a diagnosis that they're on a drug, that's not protected. So we need some clarity and consistency. And again, I think it's easier, as Jamie says, to build that at a local level, certainly, than it is at a national level. And we see that in regulations. Massachusetts has very strict rules about, or used to, I'm not sure if they still do, I think they do, about which medications could be shared, because some of them might reflect mental illness. Okay. So I think that getting to some commonality will really help us there. And it is exactly as Jamie said, that some of the hard work that needs to be done to really fill out as we work towards social needs. We've made a lot of progress on over the last couple of years. We're still not there, but a lot of progress. And behavioral health is another area where we can make some good progress over the coming year.
I think to answer one part of that question is,
Yeah.
Is this the right Congress to do that? I think our job is to make a case that this is a cost and efficiency issue. And we need to work towards this more cohesive information in a longitudinal health record format as something that would contribute to cost, quality, and timeliness. If we can make that case, then I think this is the right Congress. If we can't make that case, then it's probably not the right Congress. So I think there's an opportunity, and it's all in how you package the narrative, right?
It's so true. I do think there's a case to be made, to your point, Jamie. I think there's the packaging. I think there truly is actually a case to be made on cost and efficiency around this topic. And I just wanted to add on, Mark, your thoughts about the regulatory and kind of definitional landscape. There's also the layer of legal interpretation that would be so gosh darn helpful to have aligned. Align the policies, and then could we get the attorneys to all agree on what those say? Because we find there's a lot of variation, not only in risk tolerance, but in the actual interpretation of the law. Jay, any thoughts before I pivot us on that topic?
No, everything's been well said.
Okay, so we have 4 minutes left, and I wanted to close us out by giving each of you an opportunity to share just one takeaway or one thought that you think either resonates with you or you really want to leave people with in light of this conversation today. Is there something that, again, given our uncertain environment, tailwinds, headwinds, uncertainties, that you really want to highlight or underscore?
Again, I can start. I mean, for me, the biggest thing is, and this has in some ways been true for 20 years, but data and the technology are less of the challenge, and that's more true today than it ever has been. And the trust, as Jamie talked about, value alignment, things like that are where the real challenges lie. And that's great, because those things are less uncertain about getting there, but it's also less clear how to do them. So I think that that's my final thought is that we're right there on the cusp.
Excellent. Jamie, anything that stood out to you or that you'd leave us with as a parting thought?
Yeah, when I think about the questions and the responses, that we've talked about for the past 45 minutes, it strikes me that we've made a tremendous amount of progress, especially with treatment-based exchange, and we're on the precipice of doing something great. We just need a few nudges to help out with public health to provider data exchange, and then for provider to value-based care exchange. So we're close, but the job's not done.
Yeah,
Jamie?
I would say that I think there's a lot to be considering, as successful in interoperability. I think the challenges that that are in front of us are more complex than ever.
Well said. The trust thing really stood out to me in this conversation. I would echo that also. It is incredible over time how much we come back to that as a foundation for data sharing. And I have to admit, it's not something I think about every day, but it is so fundamental, and it requires some attention, I think, these days. With that, I'm going to thank Jay, Mark, Jamie once again for joining us for this conversation. It's been so fun chatting with you. And thank you to everybody else for joining. We're going to close this out, and I hope everybody has an awesome rest of the day.